This week on the WriterCon podcast.
Just the advice that a writing professor gave me a really long time ago, because I asked, like, of all his writing friends, like, who succeeded and then why did they succeed and others didn't. And he said that of all the writers who succeeded, they succeeded because they didn't stop writing.
Welcome to WriterCon, a gathering place for writers to share their knowledge about writing and the writing world. Your hosts are William Bernhardt, best-selling novelist and author of the Red Sneaker books on writing, and Rene Gutteridge, best-selling author of over 30 novels and screenplays.
Thank you, Jesse Ulrich, and hello, writers. Hey, there's Rene Gutteridge, my co-host for this thing. How you doing, Rene?
I am doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. This is, I think it's important to keep your prize to the calendar. I'm sure you depend on me for that. This is our last episode before Valentine's Day, which is amazing because it seems like only yesterday I was talking about Christmas. But this is the time when theoretically some people might be reading something romantic, I guess. Last time we were talking about Barry Friedman's new book, whose title we can't even say on, probably not that one, unless you want to laugh your way through the holidays. And everything's a done deal. It's not a first date book. Rene, what are you going to do for Valentine's Day?
Bill, I have been married 26 years. So long ago, we agreed that we are just going to skip this holiday. And it's not sad. We were really broke when we first were married, and it felt like a lot of pressure. And our anniversary is January 20th. So we just kind of go big then, and then get our kids stuff, and it's fine. We're totally happy with it.
Okay.
Sound like you're very happy about this.
I'm so happy about
send
it.
a copy of this to the husband. Okay, Jesse. I don't know what I think you and Michelle do for Valentine's Day. Does it involve science fiction or Doctor Who or something?
It'd be science fiction and not Doctor Who in our couple in my case, but we'll probably still be prepping for our Star Trek cruise that we're going on at the end of February. Yes, and it'd be great if that cruise is on Valentine's Day. But I don't know. We don't have like traditions necessarily, but we've agreed that I should stop buying her flowers because she keeps them, and then our house is just full of dead flowers that she eventually is going to do something with, and that became a little crazy. So a couple of years ago, I bought her like an 8-bit flower that would look like it was in like an original Nintendo game, and I just like give it to her each year.
So awesome.
Yeah. So that's how we roll.
That's excellent. All right. Our interview guest today is Rebecca Kelley, a fiction writer from Portland, Oregon. Her first novel, Broken Homes and Gardens, was published in 2015. She's also co-authored The Economical Baby Guide with Joy Hatch. When she isn't writing, she's conducting elaborate baking experiments and designing book covers and a lot of other fun stuff. I look forward to talking about her, but not about her, talking with her. I look forward to talking with her. But first, the news. All right, this first news story is here mostly because I know Jesse feels strongly that we should cover any story pertaining to Brandon Sanderson. This will be the science fiction writer you'll recall kick-started his way into about $47 million, something like that. And now he's got an audio deal, which is going with Spotify, not Audible, which is owned by Amazon, but rather by Spotify, which owns Findaway Voices, a competitor. This is sort of a follow-up to that Kickstarter where he made so much money for 4 secret novels that he said would be self-published, and then distributed in print only by his publisher, Tor. But he won't be distributing digital audio editions on Audible. He's going to do it this other way. Jesse, when does it end? I mean, does he not have enough money, or what's going on here?
So people who know Brandon Sanderson knows he is not an author of brevity. His books are very long, and in his State of Sanderson 2022, he went into a lot of detail about why he did this. And he's like, I don't need to make money from these books. So what I am going to do is help the market for other authors. And so the reason why he is, one, going with Spotify, and then a third company to help for audiobooks for people who have dyslexia, which his son has. What he's trying to do is use his market power to help other authors get better deals through these things. Because as I don't know if you mentioned, I know it's in the script, I don't know if you mentioned it out loud, but Audible takes a very large chunk of money people pay. And audiobooks, as we know, are not cheap. One, to buy, two, to produce. And he specifically is trying to, he's using his $46 million to try to build some competition in this so that people have other things to go. He said he would eventually put them on Audible, I think like a year later. But I think it's a good idea because, again, monopolies are bad, as we've talked about with the merger that didn't happen. And so I'm all for it. And if you want to read the explanation, he goes into a lot of detail.
I'm not sure I made this totally clear, but Spotify, we covered this on the show, recently purchased Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices is similarly a distributor of audiobooks, but not owned by Amazon. The advantage for authors is that they give a significantly higher royalty rate. And they can distribute to Amazon and Audible, but it seems to take longer. For some reason, it takes longer for books to get approved there. All right, news story number 2, 2 insightful reports on fiction sales, and how appropriate, since this is sort of has been turned into our Valentine's Day episode. But the romance market was the leading growth category, which I think is usually the case, and drove overall gains in the adult fiction market. This growth, however, this is interesting, is specific to print. There's a cliche, I won't say where it comes from, but that romances do better online or in the bookstore, but mysteries do better at the library because people don't want others to see what kinds of books they're reading. But romance, why are we shaming something that's so gigantically popular? It's clearly, the biggest genre, and it's only getting bigger. And clearly, it's performing a valuable function for people. And aren't we lucky that people are interested in reading something? I don't know. What do you think, Rene?
Well, as you know, my comedy publishing career was cut short by Amish romance. So
right.
I
haven't heard you put it quite like that, but
yeah, it was absolutely, these smaller genres of which I tend to sort of dwell and write are a lot of times shoved out by these enormous genres. So I don't know. I hope that the way TikTok can influence, or whatever social media happens to be around this year, next year, can influence readers to maybe find some subgenres that they might like. And, romance doesn't need any extra advertising, I would say. Everybody knows it's there. Nobody needs reminded. So, it's a good genre. I have nothing personally against the genre.
Are you sure? Because it's starting to sound like you do.
I know it probably does. It probably sounds like I might have a little bit of a, but
you have to get the Amish romances.
It's in particular, yes, the Amish romance is just, I can't even talk about it. But
they're flying off the cart. It's being drawn by
Amish romance. I tell you this, I would have bet money, which is why I should not be contributing to the news segment. I would have bet money Amish romance would go nowhere. I would have, I would, if somebody had said, hey, this is going to be huge, I would have said, that's ridiculous. So what do I know?
A weird closed off society. No, I totally get it. I could see it. Right.
Yeah. But I
people are curious.
Yeah.
You mentioned TikTok, which ties. I said there were two insightful reports. The other one, here's the bottom line: that Book Talk, the part of TikTok talking about books, drove the lion's share by far of fiction growth last year, and most Book Talk sellers are backlist, meaning older titles. So yes, backlist, Book Talk is a great thing, but not necessarily for the publishing houses front list. I mean, we talked about how Book Talk basically, they didn't just back Colleen Hoover's new book, they resuscitated the whole line. I mean, what does that portend for the future?
Yeah. I don't know. I'd already talked about TikTok, so I was waiting for Jesse to jump in.
Again, I feel like and again, who knows which episodes are airing, but I feel like I covered my thoughts on TikTok for 2023.
Okay, just cut all the stuff after I did what will now clearly be the wrap up for the news.
Sorry, Bill. I'm sorry. I jumped ahead, and I apologize.
Plus this script is.
Listen, it's
really
either Book Talk or Amazon has to be brought up in every episode. That is the streak we were going for, and it's been a while since we talked about Amazon.
All right, I think that's enough about the news. Let's talk about Rebecca Kelley. She's a fiction writer, as I've mentioned. This is her second novel just coming out, and we are very anxious to talk about that and her baking experiments and designing book covers and keeping up her 1,000+ day streak in Duolingo. Jesse, cue up the music. Let's get crack-a-lackin'. Rebecca, thanks for coming to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay, we have a traditional first question for newbie guests like you. If you could offer writers out there one piece of advice, what would it be? You can have a couple seconds. I think I would offer the same advice
that a writing professor gave me a really long time ago, because I asked, of all his writing friends, who succeeded and then why did they succeed and others didn't. And he said that of all the writers who succeeded, they succeeded because they didn't stop writing. And it's kind of simple, but it really made sense that if I stopped writing, then I obviously would never succeed at it. But if I kept going, then it was still possible.
That's great advice. I know somebody else, Bill, who says that all the time. That is his mantra. It's good advice.
Can't fail if you don't quit. Okay, Rebecca, according to some of the promotional materials that I received, you were writing book roundups for a magazine, and you noticed that very few novels, at least the ones you were writing about, featured a female as the antagonist, the criminal, or even the killer. And so you started to think, what if traditional roles were reversed? And that led to this book. True?
Yeah, I was writing a list of, it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek list of what classic novels would be better with a female protagonist. And I got to Crime and Punishment, and I started thinking that I couldn't come up with quite the equivalent with a female Raskolnikov kind of character who is the main character, but it makes all of these horrible decisions along the way. But you're kind of in his head and understanding why he's doing what he's doing and getting into all this trouble. And I just like the idea of the main character getting into all the trouble.
Right. So you create this complex and layered heroine, anti-heroine really, who could be capable of doing some horrible things. And I guess it worked because now we got this book, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us, what is this new novel about?
It's about a 23-year-old named Rosemary, whose recently orphaned half-sister Wendy shows up at her doorstep, and she wants to be taken in. And so then Rosemary ends up doing some kind of desperate things to make ends meet, including becoming the paid girlfriend of a kind of weird tech billionaire guy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a story in a nutshell.
Okay. So, okay, given what you have said about, wanting to have a strong woman in a possibly antagonistic role, I mean, are there any dangers there? Are you afraid that somebody's going to say that you've, latched onto a unfavorable trope or keyed into a stereotype you shouldn't, or do you see any dangers in that direction?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think especially because it's a woman, it seems like male main characters are sort of allowed to be bad a lot more, or maybe we're like expect it or something. But with a female protagonist, it's like, you hear that especially women readers like to relate to her and sympathize with her and maybe even kind of want to be friends with the main character. So they don't necessarily want the character to do really objectionable things.
Right.
But so I think that is definitely a concern, like in writing a book like that or selling it, or even like having readers be really turned off by it. But I feel like I didn't want to worry about that too much. Like I kind of like, I don't mind personally as a reader if I don't like the main character, but I have to be, interested in the main character.
Mm-mm. That's so interesting. My mind is spinning here as you're talking about this, because I'm thinking of something like Breaking Bad, right?
Yeah.
Which we all bought into immediately as a whole country. And then as you're writing a female antagonist, protagonist, anti-hero, whatever, you have more things to consider perhaps. So you've developed some sympathetic traits, I guess, or how did you go about addressing that specifically in this book? First of all, you said you didn't worry about it too much, but then you have created some sympathetic traits. So, which I think we all do in all of our characters, but can you take us through that process?
Yeah, I mean, I actually thought about Breaking Bad a lot and, Walter White, and why do we like him in a way? I mean, I don't know if like is the right word, but we definitely are on board with his journey, even though he does some really bad things. I hope it's not a spoiler, but, he even kills people. Mm-hmm. But I think making the motivation really clear helps, like with Walter White, he wanted to save his family. Mm-hmm. And Rosemary is kind of like that too in my book. Even though both of these characters lose sight along the way, there's a point where it's I don't think they're doing that for their family anymore. They've really broken bad at this point.
Right.
Yes, but I think that I ended up making Rosemary more sympathetic than I originally wanted her to be. because of those concerns that you're talking about, right. Well, our readers just not going to be on board with a completely, reckless kind of, or I don't know, there might be a point where the reader would just go, this doesn't work for me anymore and give it up. Mm-hmm. So I tried to make her relationship with her sister in edits stronger than it was originally, because originally I had her kind of really almost not even want to take her little sister in, kind of I don't think I'm up for it, and then just whereas then I made it well, I had to make her want to connect to her sister more than I did in the first couple drafts.
Mm-hmm.
Did you like that? I mean, when you finished it, or did it feel right? In terms of what you originally envisioned Rosemary to be?
Yeah, because I was thinking about it. And the reason I didn't want her to connect with her sister is because she was so traumatized by her past.
Mm-hmm.
And she had kind of talked herself into thinking that her family was better off without her. And that's why she distanced herself from her sister, is thinking like, well, I just hurt everyone I'm around. And so I think it was kind of bringing that out more to make it more understandable. Well, why would someone push away a little sister who showed up on her doorstep?
Mm-hmm.
And once I like figured that out a little more and made it come out in the text, I think it worked actually better than I had originally planned, where it probably just seemed pretty random. Like, why doesn't she want to take her sister in?
Right. That's good. And so that happened in the edits, as you're saying, as you're peeling back the layers and discovering your character. And that's interesting.
Yeah.
This book also deals with the so-called girlfriend experience, which I just have to tell you, I used in a book once a year or two ago too, but you use it in a much more profound character-based way than I did. Maybe you need to explain that to everyone and then explain how that fits into the book.
Okay. Well, you know how I said I was inspired by Crime and Punishment. And in that book, he has a girlfriend who is a prostitute.
Right.
And I was like, I want to tie that into, by the way, my book isn't like a retelling of Crime and Punishment. It's just kind of how it all started. But I started thinking like, maybe I could make her also the prostitute element that's in that book.
Right.
And
conflate the two.
And so she has the opportunity in the book because her roommate, it turns out, is kind of this escort, which she didn't realize until her roommate says, well, I'm done doing that now, so you could take over my business, if you want, because that would really help out your sister and kind of solve all your problems that you claim to have, like the reasons you can't take your sister in, would really make things a lot simpler for you. And then Rosemary is like, what? Well, I don't think I could do that. But she starts thinking, well, I better do it to save my sister. And, but she ends up not really exactly going through with it. But then in a kind of roundabout way, she ends up meeting this tech billionaire guy, Leo Glass. And then he propositions her with the idea of like he would pay her and she would be his girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of like spirals out of control from there.
But there's also, in addition to Leo, there's the sort of legit possible boyfriend, Sam, the musician, right? And they actually are attracted to one another. So just to confuse everybody listening, is this book a romance now?
Kind of. Well, it has a romance element to it. And there's a lot about romance or love and like, what does love mean? Like for Leo, he's like, well, he thinks that he can pay someone to be his girlfriend and that they could just both decide like, we're going to be boyfriend and girlfriend. He just has a different idea of what love is and how you can make it happen. And then the Sam thing is a kind of counterpoint to that. Like, what if you shouldn't be falling in love with someone, you do, like, can you help it? And what can you do about it?
It sounds like you have a lot of complex relationships, which always make great books and create great conflict. So can we ask what drew you to writing originally? Like, where did it all come from? From childhood, from becoming a reader? Where did this all begin for you?
I think it did begin with me being a reader. I was a really big reader as a kid. And I just read, all the time. And I also did like to write. And I think it was in 6th grade that my teacher had this assignment every day after lunch. We all had a notebook, and then she would write a prompt on the board, and then we all had to write for 5 minutes on the prompt. And then she would not grade it, but she would look over and maybe make comments like, great, or fascinating. And she really encouraged me. Like she said, my entries were really good. I mean, maybe she said that to every child. But I was like, I really liked the experience of that kind of writing. And I ended up writing stories and things. And, I majored in English in college and just kind of kept it going.
That's awesome. I love to hear that people have writing loves birthed from reading, which is, I think, how it's supposed to be. And those writing prompts are awesome. I remember those as well from my childhood. And I think those spurred a lot from me too, because it's just a little thing and you feel like you can accomplish it, but it just starts that creative process. Okay, so the other question we always ask, or almost always ask, because we think other writers are interested, and we've never heard otherwise, so we keep asking this question.
Right.
Maybe it's just for me because I'm interested in it. Tell everybody what your writing day looks like, or your writing life. Every writer's writing day or schedule or whatever looks different. What does it look like for you? Do you start in the morning? Do you always have a Pepsi? Like what does it look like for you in a writing day?
That's something that's really changed a lot, like as over the years, because I keep changing my process, trying to find the perfect one. And for No One Knows Us here, it was kind of an unusual process. Well, I don't know if it's unusual. For me, it was. Is that I decided I was going to write for an hour a day, and that's it.
Interesting.
But I would do it every day until I was done. Mm-hmm. And the reason I did that was because when I was younger, like say in my 20s, I could really write like a lot. Like I would get I would feel very inspired. Yeah. Like kissed by the muse or something. And I would just sit down and I would just like pound out page after page.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I just loved that feeling. Obviously, like it's what every writer probably enjoys the most, is like feeling like they're not even really working, but just the words are flying out. Mm-hmm. But then that stopped happening to me. Like I just wasn't inspired anymore, but I still felt like I wanted to write or I should write, but I just didn't have that fun, inspired feeling. And I started doing a lot of research, like, well, what is inspiration anyway? And how do you get it back? Like if it leaves? Mm-hmm. And then a surprising thing I found, well, again, surprising probably only to me, was like a lot of writers said, well, you don't rely on inspiration. You just sit down and you write, whether or not you're inspired. And I was like, what? Like, I don't want to do that because it doesn't sound very fun. And they said, you just have to do it. And so as an experiment only, like, I think I wanted to prove them wrong. Like, I don't think this would work very well for me. I said, I'll sit down and I'll set a timer and I'll write for an hour a day, every day for 30 days.
Uninspired.
Yeah, without any inspiration at all. And I did it. And after the first 30 days, I had written 24,000 words of this book. And I was like, oh my gosh, I wrote so much in 30 days, completely uninspired, and 30 hours, basically.
Wow.
And so I just kept it going. I kept a streak because I'd done 30 days. I'm like, I'll do another 30 days. And I did it for 411 days. And then I had a draft. And it was super long, like maybe 500 pages or something. And so at that point, doing this process, then I started revising, and it took a long time before I had a real draft after that. But that's how I wrote that book.
That is one of the best ones we've heard so far.
It really is.
That is so interesting. Oh my gosh, because we do try to tell people that as professional writers, you're not always going to have the inspiration. I love what you said, kissed by the muse, right? Like it just doesn't always happen. And you've just proven that you can write with grit rather than inspiration, and it still gets down on the page. Yeah. That's awesome.
That's fantastic. So what are you working on now, Rebecca? This one's done. What next?
Well, I had another idea that was also inspired by an old classic. I was like, well, that was a good way to get the ideas flowing for the last book. So now I'm taking An American Tragedy by Theodore Dreiser. And I did the same thing. I was like, well, how could that character be a woman? How would that work? And started thinking about that. And so it's just in the early stages, but that's sort of what I started working on.
Sounds fascinating, and I'm sure it'll be just as fantastic as this one. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Terrific interview. And hey, if you haven't joined the WriterCon Facebook group yet, you need to do that so you can join this terrific community of writers and find out what's going on in between podcasts. Just search for it on Facebook, or there'll be a link to it in the show notes for this podcast. There is also a completely free WriterCon e-newsletter, tends to go out about every other weekend. You can sign up for that at my website, which is williambernhardt.com. And speaking of super cool websites, you can get more information on Rene at renegutteridge.com or on social media, and as a senior contributor at Writing Momentum. All right. Until next time, keep writing. And remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.
Hi, this is Kevin Tomlinson with Draft to Digital. Ebooks are amazing, but there's just something about having your book in print. That's why we built D2D Print. We take care of you with free layout templates and formatting, and we can convert your ebook cover into a full wraparound print cover automatically. Come check out D2D Print and all the cool tools we've built for you. Find out more at drafttodigital.com.